Madame la directrice du musée, messieurs, dames, on est vraiment très content de se trouver ici parmi vous au musée d'art contemporain de Montréal. Et de la part de la Fondation Asie-Pacifique du Canada, je vous souhaite une très bonne soirée et ça va être comme ça. La Fondation Asie-Pacifique du Canada est visée sur des relations de grande portée entre le Canada et l'Asie. Ses recherches et ses statistiques en profondeur sur l'échange, l'immigration, l'éducation, toute une gamme de sujets est vraiment fort intéressante. Si vous vous intéressez à l'Asie, il vaudrait le coup de visiter leur site web qui est bourré d'informations et qui est pas mal traduit en français. C'est vraiment impressionnant le travail qu'ils font et je viens d'entendre aujourd'hui que notre président, Yuan Pao, est noté comme un des individus les plus influentiels sur l'Asie au Canada. So, thank you for being with us. I'm going to continue in English for obvious reasons. Tonight's talk indeed takes place within the context of le dialogue canadien sur l'Asie, the national conversation on Asia. And this is a wide collection of discussions that take place on university campuses, in the halls of business, with government, about understanding the momentous change through which Canada is now living as we experience the rise of Asia and the impact that that has on us in so many levels. It's not simply a story about pipelines. It's a story about people. It's a story about a long history and about family relationships and about thousands and thousands of people who are traveling back and forth between Asia and Canada every single day. Tonight, we'll be talking about Hong Kong, but just before I turn the mic over to our speaker, I'd like to put her remarks into a Canadian context. Hong Kong enjoys a very special relationship with Canada and vice versa. And I won't bore you with statistics, but I will give you one. By a conservative estimate, there are 300,000 Canadian citizens who live permanently in Hong Kong, and 85% of those people were born in Canada. This makes Hong Kong by far the largest Canadian city outside of Canada. There are a similar number of people from Hong Kong who live across Canada, including a number of very prominent Canadians. I can mention Adrian Clarkson, the former Governor General who was born in Hong Kong. Bing Tom, the architect. Within the art world, we have figures such as Ken Lum, Paul Wong, and even here with us tonight, Professor Alice Mingwei Jim at Concordia University. There are many people in the art world who have connections to Hong Kong, and you know, it's not such a faraway place. So also it's worth saying that Hong Kong, like Montreal, it's a bilingual city. When you go there, it's really Chinese and English all the time. And it's also, like Montreal, a city that exists at the meeting place of cultures and in a very particular political situation. So we're extremely fortunate tonight to have one of the best people in the world to talk about contemporary art in China and especially in Hong Kong, Dr. Jane DeBevoise, who is the chair of the board of directors of the Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong and in New York. She has a BA from Tufts University, an MA from the University of California, Berkeley, and a PhD from the University of Hong Kong, all in art history. Before joining the Guggenheim Museum as vice director in 1997, she spent 14 years in the banking industry, which gives her a really particular perspective. And at the Guggenheim, she was in charge of their international affairs, and in particular, led a team which produced a major exhibition called China 5,000 Years, 1997, a huge, really amazing show which covered the whole range of Chinese history, but also especially the 20th century. So she's deeply involved in the cultural life of Hong Kong. She lived there since 2002. She was appointed to by the Home Affairs Bureau of the Hong Kong government to the Committee for Museums and sat on that committee from 2004 to 2007. and then to the museum's advisory group for the development of the West Kowloon Cultural District in 2006, and we'll hear about that tonight. She is also a trustee of the Asian Cultural Council in New York. Would you please give the bienvenue de la métropole to Jane DeBevoise.
First of all, of course, I have to thank all of the people who've already been thanked, because without them, none of this would have happened, and I wouldn't have the opportunity to come to Montreal really for the first time. It's a little cold here, but I'm really looking forward to tomorrow, where I'm going to go sightseeing. I've got my coat. But really, the Canadian Art Foundation and Webb and Christine Shaw have been wonderful. Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, the senior fellow Hank Bull, is an enormous source of energy, and I thank him very much for making this connection. Montreal Museum of Art, Francois, it's great to work with you and to be here at this museum. It's a great honor for me to come also after Vishaka Desai. Vishaka is actually, she spoke as the first lecture speaker in this series. She's actually a really good friend, someone I've known for over 20 years. She's also a great mentor for all of us, and I would say women in the field, who have really led the way in terms of being just a great role model and a great friend and a great supporter. It's too bad she's no longer at the Asia Society, where she's worked for a long time, but she's come to the Guggenheim, which was, I can call it my alma mater, because I worked there for quite a number of years, and the Asia Society is coming to Hong Kong. They've just opened a new space there, so we're delighted to welcome them to the neighborhood. I'm going to show a lot of slides. It's going to be a very dense and maybe a little long. It was just so exciting to be able to talk about Hong Kong, which is never, ever talked about, or almost never talked about. The fact that Hank gave us this opportunity, and I say us, Asia Art Archive, I'm the chair of Asia Art Archive, and I will talk a little bit about our organization, but it was thrilling. Hong Kong is somewhat overshadowed by mainland China in many, many ways, but it's a very interesting, dynamic place, so bear with me if I go on a little too long and show you a little too many slides, because I want to infect you with the interest. The first time I visited Hong Kong was in 1976. I had just graduated from university, and I was a student living in Taiwan studying Chinese. I came to Hong Kong to get my visa renewed, and I have been living there on and off ever since. It's hard not to fall in love with the city. Look at this landscape. It's truly one of the most beautiful skylines in the world. Between 1976, when I first arrived there, and today, the city has changed dramatically. In the 1970s, Hong Kong was still a British colony. That ended in 1997 with the handover. And it was emerging along with Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore as one of the little tigers of economic growth in the region. Japan was the dominant economic force in Asia, and China was not yet in the picture. It's hard to believe, but it was not yet in the picture, at least economically. Hong Kong's competitive edge was light manufacturing and textiles, and an ever-increasing population of smart, hardworking, disciplined immigrants, refugees, really, from China, who worked their tails off at great personal sacrifice and prospered. In short, Hong Kong by the 1970s was a beehive of business activity. But the cultural scene, and here I'm speaking about the high cultural scene as defined by the number of art museums, galleries, concert halls, ballet troupes, independent artists, was relatively quiet. The one museum was located on a single floor in the City Hall. There were no major performing arts venues, although there was a modest concert hall also in City Hall. There were very few professional galleries, and independent artists were few and far between. There was just no market to sustain them. All artists had other jobs. But of course there was culture. The markets were teeming with vendors selling intricate handicrafts. Singers performed Cantonese opera almost every night, often outdoors in temporary bamboo theaters, and the local film industry, which is now world-renowned, was taking off. But that didn't seem to count. Hong Kong got the reputation, wrongly, as a cultural desert, and the label, in large part, stuck. But no one can say that now. Hong Kong has become a construction site of culture with a thriving design business, numerous performing arts venues, and a mega museum project, as well as many commercial art galleries and artists. So what is driving the change? The reasons are many, but when I say that the main reason is economics, you'll have to excuse me. I was a banker for 15 years, and those habits still follow me. But Hong Kong is indeed a very good place to do business, and those with a commercial interest in art understand this well. Look at the auction houses. Since Sotheby's and Christie's launched their first art auctions in Hong Kong, their business has thrived. The same is true with art fairs. 5 years ago, Hong Kong launched the first contemporary art fair, which became so successful, it was bought last year by Art Basel and has now been rebranded. First year this year in May is the Art Basel Hong Kong Art Fair. A few years ago, there was some concern that the auction houses and art fairs would abandon Hong Kong and shift their business to Beijing and Shanghai. But so far, that hasn't happened. Yes, mainland Chinese people prefer and will continue to do business with mainland Chinese institutions, and in absolute terms, this is generating huge flows. This chart I always find amazing. It was put together in 2011 and goes to maybe your dissertation or your paper on the art business, but it says that 41% of all auction fine art revenue that was generated in or from China. That includes Hong Kong there. But for international art buyers, Hong Kong is still the preferred location because of language, logistics, and legality. And most important, probably taxation. There are no taxes for the import and export of art going in and out of Hong Kong, whereas in China there are many. And then there are the large-scale building projects. This is an image of the West Kowloon Cultural District, otherwise called WKCD. After many years of deliberation and many false starts, Hong Kong has embarked on a US $3 billion capital project. Oh, the visual. Shall I smile? Capital project to transform 100 acres of reclaimed land into a giant park and cultural district, now referred to as WKCD, or West Kowloon. Now, this is a picture of what it really looks like now. It is reclaimed land. It's been sitting there for about 20 years as the city has been debating how to develop it. It is anticipated that there'll be at least 12 new venues, including a Madison Square Garden-like stadium. You can see the circular one on the right-hand side of the screen. Several concert halls, some smaller theaters, and a mega museum, a center for 20th and 21st century visual culture called M+. M for museum, plus for more than a museum. And I understand Bing Tom, who is an architect from Canada of Vietnamese descent, Chinese descent, will be designing the one of the theaters there, 350, and it's a Shichu theater, a Chinese opera theater, there in this project. So there's going to be a very large, 40% of it is mandated to be park. The rest of it will be cultural venues as well as some commercial real estate to help fund it. You can see it's across the harbor from Central. To the right-hand side of the screen, on the top right-hand side, that is Central. This is on the Kowloon side, across from Central, and there'll be ferries going back and forth. A few words about M+, the mega museum project that I was involved in developing the mission statement. It's enormous. There, in its full splendor, it'll be about 78,000 square meters. That's about the size, or a little bit larger than the Pompidou, or the Museum of Modern Art in New York, or the Tate Modern. The scope is to include design, moving image, popular culture, visual art, including ink art, something very important, a form of expression very important in that part of the world, in Hong Kong and in China. The emphasis on community outreach, education, and a Hong Kong perspective. In other words, the inspiration for the collection and the exhibition should begin with Hong Kong, then extend to other parts of China, Asia, and the rest of the world. This is an extremely exciting opportunity and an ambitious project, and it will be extremely expensive. So why the investment in time and money, which is huge and increasing by the minute? Again, there are many reasons. The reality is that Hong Kong has too few large-scale, world-class performance venues, restricting its ability to host very large international performances, from operas and rock concerts that unfortunately have begun to skip Hong Kong for the new mega halls in China. And of course, this makes nobody happy. But the bigger reason is probably, again, economics. With the Bilbao effect on many politicians' minds, from Abu Dhabi and Dubai to most provincial cities in China, Hong Kong hopes to redefine itself in order to attract investment, professional talent, and business activity. Just as it has moved from a manufacturing hub in the 1970s to a center of finance and logistics in the 1990s, Hong Kong is now looking to become a cultural destination and a center for creative industries. The target audience for the cultural venues is first Hong Kong. No cultural program can be successful without responding to and appealing to local audiences. But the 56 million people who live within 2 hours of Hong Kong in China are, of course, a major consideration. Now, Hong Kong, West Kowloon is not the only construction site in town. I don't know how many of you have been to Hong Kong. How many of you have been to Hong Kong here? Can I see a raise of hands? Oh, good. This is another construction site, slightly different. This is the Central Police Station in the central section of Hong Kong. Under increasing public pressure, the government and its allies in the real estate development area have begun to realize the need to preserve Hong Kong's few remaining heritage buildings, and several are being renovated as we speak. Here we want to mention the Central Police Station that is now being reconstituted, at least in part, as a contemporary art center. Herzog de Moron has put together a plan, and construction has started. The Central Police Station is a decommissioned police barracks and prison located in one of Hong Kong's busiest commercial districts. The buildings date back to the mid-19th century and are among the oldest and best examples of colonial architecture in Hong Kong. Here it is under construction. Hong Kong is certainly a construction site, and there is an increasing number of building projects, but hardware is only one aspect of any cultural infrastructure. More important, I would argue, is the software. For these buildings are only as vital or as relevant as the artists and independent thinkers that inhabit them and give them meaning. Therefore, for the next part of this talk, is someone keeping time here? No, okay, don't. Hopefully, this is about halfway through. For the next part of this talk, I am going to focus on the independent cultural initiatives and contemporary visual artists that help make Hong Kong the lively cultural community that it has become. First of all, quite in contrast to the large mega top-down projects that I have just described, there are a growing number of bottom-up, grassroots art initiatives that are the site of some of the most interesting cultural programming in town. These spaces are almost always small, tiny even, and they are generally founded and run by artists or art critics, and their focus is often, but not always, art from Hong Kong. The first one I have on the screen right now is a space called 1A Space, which was founded by an artist named Xiao Qian Phi in the 1980s. It's a tiny little space, but they do some really interesting programming. It's located on the Kowloon side. Next door is a space called Videotage, again, founded by a woman named Ellen Pao. It's one of the most interesting spaces in Hong Kong and does experimental work and exchange in new media and moving image. Ellen is among the four crossing their hands on the left-hand side. Parasite is another absolutely tiny but wonderfully vibrant and interesting space. You can see on the left-hand side here, it's just a storefront, effectively. It's a little, what we used to call chop houses, turned into an exhibition space, founded again by a group of artists, Zhang Dakping, Warren Leung, Phoebe Mann, Sarah Wong, and others. They're in the right-hand side of this slide. Another fairly newer initiative is called Woofer 10. Maybe, Alice, you know where Woofer 10, the word, comes from, because I've never quite understood. But again, started by artist/art critic Jasper Lau King Hua. It's on Shanghai Street on the Kowloon side. And its real mandate is to get involved in a community dialogue, community art, working with the local, which is basically a working class community in that area, to develop an interest in conversation, in communication. Okay. Over 10. I'm going to pause a little bit here to talk about Asia Art Archive. Asia Art Archive is it's a wonderful organization that I have a great honor of being the chair of. It's founded in 2000 by Claire Hsu, who's this young woman on the left-hand side. I will point her out right here. And a gentleman by the name of Johnson Chang, or Zhangzong Chang, two Hong Kong people. It is a library, and it's an archive. It is open to the public 6 days a week from 10 to 6, and we are a registered charity in Hong Kong. Now, because we can't go there right now, what I'm going to do is take you through some slides of our website. We have a really very robust website, and I really urge all of you to go to it at some point in the next few weeks and take a sort of look around. We really, because we're in Hong Kong and much research and scholarship is being done in Asia, in other parts of Asia, not in Hong Kong, but also in North America, we really wanted to have as much material as possible available on our website. So here's our web homepage. Our activities are divided into several categories. First, we have a library, as I said. Here's a picture of our library. Again, it's open to the public, free of charge. We have over 35,000 cataloged items. We're perhaps immodestly, I'll have to say, the largest resource, the most comprehensive resource for material about Asia contemporary art, or contemporary art from Asia. That includes monographs, catalogs, reference materials, as well as a very robust archive of materials, which I'll talk a little bit about later. This collection is fully searchable on the web. For example, if you'd like to find out what material we have about Ai Weiwei, an artist that I assume you all know well, you plug in the name Ai Weiwei, and out comes 580 items. If you go to the section called Library Catalog, you'll come up with 381 items. Each one of these items has been scanned, at least the cover has been scanned, obviously not the book has been scanned, but if you click on one of these catalogs, what you'll see, or one of these books, you'll get a very, very big, a long description as what's in it, the chapter headings, who wrote about it, where it was published, as well as other important aspects or information about that publication. We are not just a library, we're not just a static collection, we also have a very active program of activities, of workshops, of symposiums, of talks, of artist residencies. And right now we have a very interesting residency going on by a mainland Chinese artist called Song Dong. The exhibition that he developed during his residency opened yesterday in Hong Kong. But we also do local residencies. Map Office did a residency, the last one, Wong Wai-ying did one, Tozer Pak did one. We're very excited about our residency projects, and we're really looking for artists who work with archives, issues of history, issues of memory, and we welcome proposals. We also have series of talks. For example, in May of every year, there is an art fair in Hong Kong, and you really should go take a look at it. It's a fascinating art fair. We're kind of holding our breath because Art Basel has taken it over, and it was a homegrown initiative, and now it's Art Basel, and we're worried about the McDonaldization of culture, and is it going to be just like all the other art fairs? They've promised that it won't be, but we'll see. However, as part of this, we have been privileged to be the educational partner of the art fair for the last 5 years and run a series of programs. We videotape all of our programs, and now they're viewable online. So if you go in, you can see the talks and the symposiums that we put together. We also do archiving. We do archiving projects, very big archiving projects in India and Southeast Asia and Philippines and in Vietnam, but one that was very close to my heart, and in fact I've been running/mothering for the past 5 years, is a project on the 1980s in China. The 1980s is a transformative moment in China, but much of the material about it was on the verge of disappearance, was on the verge of destruction. So we responded to this sense of urgency and went to China and interviewed over 100 artists, and not just artists, editors, critics, curators who were active in China in the 1980s. We have slowly loading these interviews online. We have 45 video clips, all viewable online of these interviews. Here is a list of video clips as well as their full transcripts. For example, here's an artist, Xu Bing, who some of you may know. You just click on the icon and you will get it. It's also on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel for these interviews. We've been privileged that many artists and curators and critics have given us their personal materials, one of which is a man by the name of Xiao Qian, who will be speaking with you, I see, at the end of this program, or not maybe here at another venue, but is part of this program. Xiao Qian is an amazing man. Here's him at a younger age. He's given us his personal archive, which includes materials such as catalogs, newspaper clips, family photographs of artists, as well as exam papers, which are really interesting to see. I don't have time to talk about, but the one in the middle is an English exam. We also did a video. We created a documentary focusing on art from the Guangdong region. It's an area. One of the things we're very interested in is uncovering that which has been overlooked. Art from Guangdong region, the southern part of China, is basically, in many ways, been left out of many of the history books that have been written about art and avant-garde practice in China in the 1980s. And we interviewed a large number of artists and put together a 50-minute video, which is called From Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, to Teresa Tang, who's Deng Li-jun, who's a pop singer. All Chinese would know it. From high culture to low culture. Cantonese contemporary art in the 1980s. Now I've got 20 minutes left, maybe 15 minutes left. And I want to talk about artists. The independent art spaces and the growing alternative art galleries, there are also some very interesting alternative art galleries in Hong Kong, are forming an increasingly vibrant local art community. But none of this would be possible without the artists that give us at Asia Art Archive and these art spaces our inspiration and direction. But who are they? You know the stars from mainland China. You know who these people are. This is Zhang Xiaogong. You've seen these images before. Zhang Xiaogong, Yuan Mingjun, Cai Guocheng, and Wang Guangyi. These are well-known art stars in China. The art market has embraced them. But in general, Hong Kong artists have been overlooked. $5 million for work by a mainland Chinese artist is not uncommon. And according to one survey in 2008, 11 of the 20 top-selling artists globally were from mainland China. But art by a Hong Kong artist rarely exceeds $50,000. Even $10,000 would be a very big price. The history of art in Hong Kong has not been written, although there are some books and a few essays which have begun to offer a productive framework. Your own Alice Jim has written very interestingly on Hong Kong, as well as other scholars like David Clark, Anthony Po-Shan Lun, and Lau Kin-Hua. But rather than summarizing their work, to which I could never do justice, I would like to spend a short time highlighting a few artists whose work represents some of the recurrent concerns and modes of expression. To begin, most historians start their discussion of modern Hong Kong art with Liu Xiaoqun, the artist I have on the screen right now. Liu Xiaoqun and his followers, who continue to this day, and it's very active, to take inspiration from the 100-year-old or 1,000-year-old tradition of Chinese ink painting. In the case of Liu Xiaoqun and Wushis Wong, here are two images by Liu Xiaoqun, and then one image, and I have another one by Wushis Wong. These two artists, the goal of these two artists was to and is to update or modernize the venerable tradition of Chinese painting, Chinese traditional painting, with elements of Western-style modernism, in particular abstract expressionism, if you look at Liu Xiaoqun's work, and design. Liu Xiaoqun's Zen series, which is this, which he created in the 1970s using broad brush strokes of black ink on paper, punctuated by a few strategic daubs of red. Again, as you see, this is called the Zen series. This was done in the 1970s. His it's hard to say student, not really a student, but his follower, Wushis Wong, continues his interest in merging East and West by drawing on the Chinese landscape tradition, which he often sets against a geometric grid. Look carefully. In this painting, you will see a mountainous landscape reminiscent of monumental masterpieces of the Song dynasty, or traditional Song painting. But here, the composition is sliced into squares, which are juxtaposed to form a dynamic abstraction of rolling hills and waterfalls. That previous painting was painted in 1978. This painting is a more recent one. Again, it's set against a grid, but it's actually also a landscape painting, is example of a more recent work. It's 2004. Now, this tradition of continuing the Chinese landscape or Chinese ink painting tradition, the Guohua tradition, still very active. And I would say, some people would say there are more painters painting in this tradition than in any other tradition, or in any other way in Hong Kong. But there's another, let's put it, trend in Hong Kong that I'd like to point out. And this talks about the attention to the local, which is often depicted with subtlety and humor. And I'd like to begin with this older generation artist, Louis Chan, who died in 1995. In this image, which was created with water-based color on paper, the artist fantasizes about Hong Kong's distinctive geography, with its hilly islands, meandering shoreline, hot summer sun, and abundant marine life. Fish, although it's not in this one, is a recurrent motif in his work. In another work, he seems to draw inspiration from Hong Kong's multiracial society. And these startled people with bulbous noses and bulging lips seem to be caught mid-sentence and pressed together in shallow, almost claustrophobic spaces like specimens under glass. Now I turn to a younger artist named Wilson Xie, who was born in 1960. This artist also takes inspiration from the local environment and popular culture, and renders his subjects in subtle but often humorous ways. In this image, which is painted using ink and water-based color on paper, he assembles prominent members of Hong Kong's billionaire class and gathers them together in an imaginary rock band. This work is called, it's from $1 Band, it dates to 2008, and includes a caricature of Li Ka-shing, one of the richest men in the world, Stanley Ho, one of the richest men in Macau and Hong Kong, Rin Shaw, Thomas Kwok, Nina Wong, and others. In the next slide, he casts famous buildings as people, starting with the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, which is crouching on the left-hand side, at the feet of the Jardine House. These two were built in 1963 and 73, and they are dwarfed in this painting by the International Financial Center, IFC, which was finished in 2003. This humorous composition forms a mini history of architecture in Hong Kong. Another artist, a woman named Xiao Qian Phi, also works with ink on paper. This is called Banana Fashion. You just look at it for a second, you'll see some kinky stuff going on here. She came out of Hong Kong, Chinese University. This same university has generated a lot of artists, graduated a lot of artists in Hong Kong. Another artist who draws inspiration from the Hong Kong's local film industry is Xiao Qian Phi. Here we have a series of film stills loosely reproduced with enamel paint on canvas, whose subtitles serve as humorous titles of his work. Here we have any self-respecting thief would be proud to steal this painting. It comes from a movie called Once a Thief, a movie called Shaolin Soccer. Here's a film still. If we don't have any dreams in life, we look like salted fish. And then this is a film that actually I think went international, called Infernal Affairs by Wong Kar-wai. The quote is great and it's perfect for Hong Kong. I want my identity back. Another artist, a young woman who is also interested in film. She's a film buff, goes to films all the time. Her name is Ho Sing To. She has created a series of meticulous maps of the interiors of movie theaters and their seating plans. There's another woman artist named Sarah Tzu. She is a ceramic artist and draws on the traditional ceramic techniques to transform mundane subject matter into objects of surprising and refined beauty. In this sculptural work, Sarah dips objects from her everyday life, in this case clothing, into fine porcelain slip, which she fires at very high heat. The clothing, of course, burns up, and what is left is intricate but empty shells, reminiscent of the delicate openwork often found in some Qing Dynasty imperial pottery. The next group of artists that I want to talk about take inspiration from their local environment as well, but eschews any commitment to one medium. Loosely speaking, they are conceptual artists whose practices are less object-based and more ephemeral or performative in nature. This artist's name is Lung Chi Wo, or Warren Leung. Again, we saw his name before because he was one of the founders of Parasite. He has turned his camera to the sky, but also on the local cityscape, and in one series captures the cracks in the sky between the high-rise building and Hong Kong's main central commercial district. In another related work, and I believe, Alice, you worked on this, right? In another related work called City Cookie, which took place between 1999 and 2003, the artist turns these cracks in the sky, if you remember them here, into cookie shapes. In an ongoing collaboration with Sarah Wong, he serves these cookies to visitors at his exhibitions. This he did, and I guess, Alice, you worked with Johnson Chang on this for the catalog to the Venice Biennale in 2001, I believe. The idea of baking cookies in the shape of urban skylines may be thought of as a celebration of Hong Kong's distinctive cityscape, or perhaps an oblique comment on Hong Kong's consumerist culture. Stanley Wong is the next artist I'm going to talk about. He's a designer as well as an artist who often uses lowly but ubiquitous red, white, and blue plastic tarp or plastic tarpaulin material, the kind you might see covering cargo on the back of a flatbed truck, to make fine art objects and installations. Here he has created a tea house in red, white, and blue for the 2005 Venice Biennale. Here, whoops, we'll go back. Which he says symbolizes the spirit of Hong Kong and welcomes visitors to sit and think about the 21st century in an atmosphere of mutual trust and openness. These are his words. Here again, he's using this red, white, and blue material to cover the walls of the subway in Hong Kong. Lee Kit is another artist who will represent this year Hong Kong at the Venice Biennale. He also uses lowly materials, in this case simple cotton fabrics, which he hand paints to create tablecloths, picnic blankets, and hand towels. While these are aesthetically pleasing works in themselves, Lee Kit is more interested in the social interaction and personal narratives that arise in the spaces that these simple fabrics inflect. Here we have that same fabric being used as a picnic blanket. In this piece, the center is a hand-painted hand towel. Whoops. It's got this lag on it, which hangs in this bathroom photograph between other hand towels. And about this piece, which he calls Story 2, he writes enigmatically, he lives somewhere in China with his girlfriend. The apartment is quite cozy, though a bit small, but he only feels at home when he's alone in their bathroom. Tozer Pak Sheng-Chuen. Here's a piece where Tozer, actually working in the subway, working in public spaces, is a very prominent feature of a lot of art practice in Hong Kong. There's no contemporary art museum, although M+ may fill that gap. But at the moment, the artists are very inventive about the kinds of places that they use. And here's Tozer at one station in Hong Kong called Rainbow, that's the name of the station, where he's decided that the rainbow tiles on the station that cover the column, the structural column, are not correct. So he's decided to amend this by putting bright lime green tape on the tiles. But here's a project that I'd like to point out, and this is the last one that I am going to talk about today. It's called White Library, a mind reaching for emptiness. It is a result of a residency that Tozer did at Asia Art Archive. Tozer's work often deals with or is concerned with the passage of time, with the interstitial spaces in society and the everyday, which are often overlooked and ignored. Oftentimes I find that his work is making visible that which is usually not visible. And in this work, he attempted to make copies of all the blank pages of all the books in our library. About this exercise, he said, if you see, here he is in the library on the left-hand side. Here is one of his blank books. If you think about it, if you open a book, there actually are often blank pages in those books. And then here's a sort of a mini exhibition we did for him where we exhibited his blank pages. About this exercise, he said, a blank page is a pause of time in reading. It could also be readable, offering infinite imagination. A blank page is common in all books, giving us a vision of all. My residency at Asia Art Archive is to photocopy all the blank pages from its collection, attempting to create an alternative to the archive's collection. I think I have about 5 minutes left. And we can take lots of questions afterwards. Activism. Hong Kong has often been characterized or caricaturized as a highly pragmatic, ideologically indifferent society. But that is changing dramatically, and many artists are at the forefront of this change. The final series of images that I will finish with tonight show how artists in Hong Kong are contributing their imagination, visual acuity, and humor to highlighting a series of interlocking public concerns. In 2003, resistance to Article 23, which was anti-sedition legislation proposed by the Hong Kong government, central government, brought about 500,000 people to the streets in protest, which resulted in postponing indefinitely this proposed anti-subversion legislation, and may have contributed to the subsequent resignation of the then chief executive. Since 2003, dissatisfaction with the political situation has grown, and the protests have multiplied. I'm just going to just show a few slides of some of the protests in which students and artists have been particularly active. This protest was about the destruction of the Star Ferry Pier in 2006 and the Queen's Pier in 2007. These are two ferry piers in Hong Kong that were located on the shore in Central and had been there for a very long time and are sort of landmarks, or were landmarks, of Hong Kong. These two piers have now been destroyed, taken down, and actually relocated to another part of the harbor. But many artists and young people came out to protest this because they felt that this was part of their heritage, their cultural heritage, the architectural heritage of Hong Kong, which was disappearing. In this protest, artists plastered the imperiled piers with handwritten posters and created simple images that they printed on T-shirts and wore around town. So you have a picture of the pier, which was about to be torn down, and on the right-hand side, some linoleum prints that were used as to create signs and T-shirts that were worn by the students. The students didn't win in this case, nor did they win in this case. In 2009, a protest arose, again led in large part by students, and artists were active in this. This protest began as a grassroots effort to protect a small village in the new territories, a village that had been there for many, many generations of a certain group of families. And this village was going to be destroyed by the construction of a high-speed railway between Hong Kong and Guangzhou. But this protest soon expanded into a full-blown opposition to the railway itself. And here we see students using aspects of performance art and Tibetan rituals to surround the LegCo building, the legislative building, for many days, bringing public attention to this, to their cause. Another, again in 2011, a protest in support of Ai Weiwei, who was detained without proper legal support. I think everybody knows about this, but a lot of the opposition or a lot of the criticism of the way that Ai Weiwei's detention was handled came out of Hong Kong, although it there were a lot of protesters around the world. On this occasion, a young artist and others worked surreptitiously to stencil images of Ai Weiwei on buildings, storefronts, and sidewalks to protest his detention. Here you have the Who's Afraid of Ai Weiwei stenciled on the sidewalk. For a long time, nobody knew the identity of this young woman. And there was some concern that she would be arrested for desecrating public property. More recently, and this has brought a lot of people onto the streets, is a protest called the Anti-National Education Protest. And this is the last group of slides that I'm going to show. But this is very recent. This was this summer. This protest was triggered by what was deemed to be a Beijing, mainland Chinese-backed plan for, quote, moral and national education, which many Hong Kong citizens equated with political indoctrination and brainwashing. And here we have many artists, or there were many artists who participated in this very large march. They're not the only. There are many, many, many citizens of China, of Hong Kong, who came down, and also of China, which is an interesting development. Mainland Chinese who come down to, I think at first, watch, but also to participate, have come to participate in some of these marches. Here we see Casey Wong, a local Hong Kong artist, who created a pink float in the form of a tank. So it's not a red tank, it's a pink tank, from which the leadership of the, quote, real Cultural Bureau, here we have the artist waving to the crowds, and distributing fake $100 million bills to gain support for his patriotic program. The conflation of money and politics is a common one in Hong Kong. This is my conclusion. Hong Kong is a city in transition. The built environment is changing rapidly, and construction projects like the mammoth West Kowloon Cultural District will provide opportunities for new and hopefully iconic architectural interventions, as well as much needed infrastructural support for the growing art scene. But perhaps more significant is the transition taking place in Hong Kong's public sphere. Johnson Chang has called Hong Kong China's public space and tracks the city's role from the late Qing dynasty to the present day as a free zone of social activism and civic debate. First of all, contemporary art everywhere is not the most popular aspect of art. If you go to the Metropolitan Museum in New York, it's mobbed. But you go to a small contemporary art exhibit, there's not that many people there. It's more difficult. But I would say, it's interesting that that was your impression, because my impression is quite different from that. If you think about the spaces that I've talked about, the smaller spaces, these spaces are started by Hong Kong people, most of which were artists or art critics. Their community and their constituency and their audience is completely Hong Kong Chinese, as far as I can tell. Of course, there are interested foreigners like me, but we are very much in the minority. So I would welcome you to come to the Hong Kong Art Fair, for example, next May. It is jammed, I mean uncomfortably jammed with the local community. I mean, to the point you can't move. I mean, there are intersections that become gridlocked, and you may be there for like an hour. And it's not foreigners. It's local families who are bringing their, local parents who are bringing their children or their grandparents or their, to look at this stuff. They're not buying, these people can't buy, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're really interested, they're very, very curious, and they're coming in the droves. So, you know, that's my impression. This, you know, contemporary art is one of these things. It's in any society, in any community, it's in evolution. And but I think in general, in Hong Kong, the impetus in the contemporary art field of Hong Kong practicing artists is from Hong Kong. Alice, you may have a view on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you to the previous question. You just made me think of what Casey's been doing. I mean, here's an artist who's taking to the streets. And so contemporary art, in a way, is very much in public space. And if you think about the demonstrations or even the actions, the interventions in support of the Free Ai Weiwei campaign all over Hong Kong, and that trickled down all the way from Hong Kong to Kassel in Germany, right? That is those are very local initiatives that are very much more present, and certainly, of course, the art fair would bring more attention to these artists, because at the same time the art fair runs, you'll have a lot of many other exhibitions all around Hong Kong, on at the same time, which also generates more attention. So I think that there's a development in the last this whole period that Jane's been talking about that's been very exciting and dynamic, and certainly signaling that contemporary art is gaining a foothold in the public conscience. You know, but may I ask a question? Okay. Thanks. And thank you, Jane, for also bringing in the development of M+, because it's been a little bit of a it's still in development, isn't it? And so I was just thinking of asking you to elaborate a little bit on that, but in connection with how the professionalization of curating has also played a part in this developing scene in recent years, because I know Parasite, the art school, they all have these curatorial programs, kind of. Yeah. They're not degrees per se, but they are means to sort of get artists involved, and also very emerging, budding curators to get to the level of being professional in the field. Maybe you could comment on that.
Well,
thank you.
I would say the beginning of the professionalization of, and we're in the process, we're at the Asia Art Archive, we are working on we work in various different areas, but one of the areas that's of great interest to us is Hong Kong and Hong Kong history, art history, mapping the art scene in Hong Kong and the development of the art scene in Hong Kong. I mentioned the importance of Chinese University. Chinese University is a studio at Chinese University. It's a Chinese language university. It's called the Chinese University in Hong Kong. Has a studio at practice. It's actually started in the 1950s, but it recently has become extremely active by graduating many, if not most, of the artists that we're talking about today. So in terms of the visual artists, practicing artist side, they've really been the cradle of that development. A very important watershed moment was the founding of the Arts Development Council. The Arts Development Council is an agency of the Hong Kong government called that was founded in 1995. And if you look at many of the art spaces that I have, the small art spaces, the grassroots art spaces that I pointed out, they all started around that time. Ellen is actually a bit of an outlier there, but she's got an unusual energy and unusual tenacity. But many of the art spaces are primarily funded and were founded around the time that the Arts Development Council. The Arts Development Council started putting money into that, those kinds of small initiatives. But more recently, with the development of the West Kowloon project, there has been a recognition in Hong Kong at the highest level that in order to have a vibrant museum of the size of the Pompidou or the Tate, they needed to have curators and have professional museum staff who had the expertise to run an organization at that scale. And clearly in Hong Kong, it doesn't exist. There are actually 8 museums, existing government museums in Hong Kong: Science Museum, History Museum. There is a Fine Arts Museum. There's a Heritage Museum. They do have professional staff, and these people are good because they're run by the government. Bureaucratically, they get strangled at times. So they're often not the most imaginative places, but that's not the fault of the young people who work there. The young people who work there are great. And so that is a training ground, but they are government bureaucrats or civil servants, and they have actually really quite good positions, and they have jobs. What they need to do is to develop staffing and expertise for M+. So what you're seeing is a lot of funding going into the development of professional museum or cultural practitioners. So every one of the universities in Hong Kong, whether it's Chinese U, Lingnan, Baptist, Hong Kong U, I mean, all these institutions are creating programs, cultural management programs, curatorial programs, Hong Kong the Hong Kong Art Centers. There are many of these curatorial programs. They're not master's degrees, we understand them, but they're there and they're being funded and they're being encouraged by the government in order to develop the staffing necessary to handle an institution the size of M+. And not just M+, we have 12 performing arts venues. They all need cultural managers. And these are large and they're meant to be world class, whatever that means. And therefore there's a big push. Now what's interesting is that what do you do with these people before M+, now they're churning out these new curators. And they're giving them opportunities and funding, but M+ is not going to be there. The official date is 2017, but it hasn't broken ground yet. And I was involved in the Guggenheim Bilbao. I wasn't in charge of that organization, but I became in charge of the exhibition program after it opened. And from the time Bilbao was a twinkle in Tom Krenz, the director of the Guggenheim's eye, as well as the mayor of Bilbao, to the time it opened, I think it was at least 10 years. So, these big infrastructural projects, you have to go through design contests and architectural contests, and they've got to be vetted. And in Hong Kong, they've got to be vetted by 1 million people and vetted again by another 1 million people. I mean, maybe it'll be open by 2017. But you've got all these young curators all, geared up and ready to go. So what's happening is there are many more independent art spaces opening, many more sort of entrepreneurial young people renting spaces on a temporary basis. People are being hired to work in galleries. There are many more galleries. Gagosian, Perrotin, White Cube, Ben Brown. I mean, there's one new gallery after another is opening up in central Hong Kong. They all need staffing. So these young people are going into those jobs. Now, why are all these galleries opening up when Hong Kong has got the most expensive real estate on earth? The issue is really in mainland China, there's some still, and this may change, some still major issues around taxation. Taxes in China have always been a bit vague. I mean, they exist, but their enforcement is sometimes erratic. I mean, you can see the situation with Ai Weiwei. He was detained ultimately on a tax evasion charge. Artists' artwork is brought into China. Supposedly, when you bring artwork into China, there's a 30% import tax. Nobody ever paid 30% import tax. Everybody under-invoiced, and I'm not, everybody under-invoiced their artwork. Suddenly, in May of last year, right before the Hong Kong Art Fair, boom, suddenly a lot of people were detained on it. This practice has been going on for years and years. So it scared a lot of galleries and who are Western galleries who need to operate properly because they have their own auditors and they have their own regulations in their home countries. And so many of them are moving to Hong Kong and setting up spaces, not huge spaces, but setting up spaces in central Hong Kong. But again, these organizations need staffing. So that is filling some of the gaps, but you're seeing all the time new galleries, new young, small galleries. That's where really fun stuff is happening. The small galleries are popping up all over the place in temporary spaces. But it's kind of, it's the bridge before, I think, the ultimate outcome, which is West Kowloon.
Jane, in case I missed it, can you please tell us the address of the Asia Archive website?
Yes, and anyone who wants some material, I have a couple of our newsletters. We do one newsletter a year, wonderful. And I have my card, and anybody who wants to contact us, I can let you know. But it's very easy. We're AAA, not the Automobile Association of America, not Alcoholics Anonymous, not the Astronomers Association of America. It's AAA, Asia Art Archive.org, O-R-G.HK. Very easy. If you look up Asia Art Archive, you also get to us. And I really ask you, beg you to go to our website. You'll see, there's just tons and tons and tons of stuff on it. And what's really exciting to me, because I travel all the time and I can't often go to our programs, but all of our programs are now videotaped and they're viewable online.
Merveilleux. Merci encore, Jane.
Thank
you so
beaucoup.
much. Merci à vous tous. Merci à nos partenaires. La prochaine conférence aura lieu mercredi prochain. C'est une conférence de la série L'art contemporain entre l'histoire et le temps. Une conversation entre Christine Ross et Olivia Boudreau. Bonne soirée.